Welcome back to the Writing Center's podcast, Tutor Talks. I am here with Abby and Emma again to discuss some more topics about writing an essay. Last time we talked about how to come up with a topic, and we looked at some assignments that professors had, and we were kind of thinking about during that podcast, the beginning process, like how do you really start out? How do you come up with a topic, which is a common issue for a lot of students here on campus. So this podcast, we're going to focus, a little bit more on how to actually go through that process. Like once you have a good idea of what that topic is and you've clarified everything with your professor, what then should you do? How do you approach writing the paper? How do you get the information you need? So Abby and Emma are going to tell us, they are students on campus, they're great students, different majors, different areas they have to write about, are going to tell us how they approach writing a paper. So I'll let you guys just start talking about what you actually do when you have to write a paper.
So once I get the assignment and, everything's clarified, I will then outline everything. So if I have really specific points that I might forget later on, I'll jot those down where they need to go in the paper, and then I'll just do the main ideas after that. And then once all of that is done, then I'll get my research and I'll get the main websites that I'm trying to get it from, and then specific quotes. And then from there, I'll just put in headphones, listen to Pandora, and then start writing. I'll sometimes do it in chunks. So if it's a longer paper, whether a research paper or just a longer essay, I might do it over the span of a couple of days, depending on when it's due, or I'll just knock it out in between classes if I have a couple of hours.
Yeah, I definitely think that I approach it from a similar way. Things are a little bit different over in the nursing building, but I do a lot of more technical writing, a lot of research-based writing, so before I even sit down and start with my APA header, I gotta find my articles that I'm gonna pull my information from. I start out by doing like an outline so that I can at least formulate the structure and put it down on paper, the direction that I want to go in my writing. And so find these articles. I like to pull direct quotes that really emphasize the points I'm trying to make in my paper. And then from there, once I have my whole outline done, I'll go and I'll just take it and I'm going to stitch all of these pieces together until it forms the main big concept that I'm really trying to write about. And then so that's, the whole physical aspect of writing a paper. But for me, I'm a huge person in believing in, like, the environment that you're writing into. So for me personally, I can't get anything done if I stay in my house. So I have to go to the library. I can't listen to other people. So I'd normally put in my headphones and listen to, like, classical study music. And I like to sit down and write the whole paper in one shot, or at least get all of it done in one start and finish time, because once I get the ball rolling on a concept, I don't want to cut it short and lose half of what I was thinking. I want to get it all down on paper as fast as I can.
That's great. So it sounds like both of you really have, at this point, your process down. Would you say, though, as when you got to college as freshmen, did you have that same process, or was it something you grew into?
Absolutely not.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a science that I feel like I've worked out over the last couple of years. Man, I don't know how I ever did it when I was a freshman and I came for the first time. But I wouldn't even start with an outline. Like, an outline was not something that I started to work into my process until probably my sophomore year. So I feel bad for Dr. Creighton having to read my non-outlined papers when I was a freshman. But it took me a while to find that process. There's no way I could have come up with that.
Yeah, and that's something we try to stress to freshmen, if you're one of those younger students listening to us, that it takes a while to develop your own pace, your own process, like what makes you comfortable, what doesn't make you comfortable. So that's something I think to think about as you go into writing something that you want to be successful, like what works for you best. I personally don't think anyone can emphasize that enough, because for the most part, at least in drafting, it is individual. And then we talked a lot about collaboration in here, but as you're drafting. For the most part, when people draft, it's pretty individual, so get comfortable doing that. So you guys have your own processes, and I think both of you mentioned the content. And last podcast we talked about topic, but now as you're sitting down to work on this paper, whether it's in the library, you have your headphones on, I think you both mentioned like getting the information you need. My question to you as tutors, as experienced college writers, how do you know what kind of information you need for a paper? Where do you start with that? Maybe your professor has explicitly said what exact information you have to include. Maybe your professor has said you need to quote-unquote research. Maybe the professor didn't label it at all, but you're going to have to write about something. How do you know what kind of information you need? Where and how do you guys get your information for papers?
I always try to include the textbook, if there is one for the class, as much as I can, just so it's not like random information that I've pulled out. But I always try to use the textbook, and then I always try to find some kind of article or some kind of quote to reinforce what's in the textbook and maybe bring in some new information. Like I said earlier, like we were talking earlier, a lot of my classes have discussion posts, and for one of them, the professor requires us to use links and to reply to people with using new information. And so a lot of them, this is an income tax class, so I have to use IRS articles or maybe like Forbes or New York Times articles and find something with that. Even though that is always hard to do, I always try to reinforce something using those quotes.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. A lot of the writing that we do over in the nursing program, you're required to use the textbook, but then you are also required to find outside articles and bring it in. So I typically start with the textbook because that's the book that the professor's using in class. That's the book that the professor's using, when they sit down and write the exam. So that's kind of like my main source that I'm going to use, and I'm going to primarily just use that to really just solidify the concept of whatever I'm talking about. Just make sure that I have a really good grasp on the concept that whatever we're being taught in class. And then from there, I try to pull in outside articles that talk about this concept, but in a way that it's related in the real world, in a way that it's related to either current events or ways that it's connecting to the world, which it really helps me further my understanding of whatever I'm writing about, because it's great to understand a concept, but sometimes it's difficult when the only resource you're working with is the textbook, because the textbook is the perfect ideal world. I want to see how it plays out, in real life. But you do have to be careful, especially with current event type materials, in terms of validity and credibility and where you're getting those sources from. So it was a bad habit to get out of when I came to college and had to up my writing game, to get out of like those Wikipedia articles or these articles with all the ads down the side and it's a .com article. So I definitely had to start looking for, the .govs and the .orgs and
EDUs.
Yeah, the EDUs and all of these, or all of even the articles that you could get from the databases that we get through the library. There is a way to find readable content in a way that relates really well to real life without it being your clickbait article from just anywhere.
I feel like it's kind of overwhelming when you go to the database. Like freshman year for University 101, I was like, what the heck is this? But you have to just know what you need to look for and know what your topic is, know what your paper is going to be about, and then find the information. Like Emma was saying with the .govs and the .orgs, I always try to stick to that just because, of course, with the Forbes and New York Times, those are kind of trustworthy depending on what it is about. But with other stuff, I just try to stick to the government websites.
Yeah, a little bit of a higher credibility than WikiHow, whatever.
Yahoo Answers it was for a long time.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Which
way back when.
Which was very, very unverified. And this is probably a nice place to mention and kind of remind people that the library is not just online. And I don't know if many students realize, because we work with the library perhaps more than some other students on campus, but you can go to the library, you can make a consultation appointment just like you do at the Writing Center, and you just literally put in your name, your class, your time, and the librarians will sit down with you, walk through the databases, help you pick out articles. And so I would definitely recommend that to a student who is at the place where they're overwhelmed or not really sure how to get that readable content. I like how you said that, Emma. So take advantage of that from the library, because they are the experts over there. And one thing that they're really trying to focus in on is doing exactly what we're talking about, helping students being able to sift through all that information better. So I would recommend that to any student who is kind of at the overwhelmed stage. And I think both Abby and Emma just talked about not only their writing process, but their information finding process. And it seems to me, and you guys can agree or not agree, it sounds to me that both of you really get your topic, your outline, maybe any like key points before you really go to find the information. Is that true for the most part, or it kind of depends?
So, yes and no, because I definitely do like to define my topic and, kind of have a loose idea of the direction I'd like to go into. I think some of those key points, I may have in my head what I think I want to talk about, but once I start looking for articles, those key points might be changed a little bit. They might be, I might find something way better that I didn't even know about before I started researching, or maybe they just might be a combination of what I thought I wanted to write about and what I actually found in the research. Yeah. So I would say that for the most part, my topic and the general direction that I want to go into is pretty formulated before I research, because I feel like that also helps me in terms of narrowing down the amount of articles that I get back when I start searching through the databases. But sometimes, when you're just reading through and you're looking at different things, you might find something that is a stronger point. You might find something that you didn't think of beforehand. So say those key points, for the most part, I might have an idea, but I'm not rigid in terms of what
you're willing to change it.
I'm willing to change it and kind of evolve as I'm going through the research. Yeah. And I don't know if it's the same for you, Abby, but
generally, yeah. I mean, sometimes if there is a limited option or like a limited requirement of what I need for a course, then maybe I won't change. But I mean, I can't count how many times I've changed my topic, based off of what I've seen that I like better.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm trying to say is it's good to walk into getting information with a general idea, but be willing to change. And not only be willing to change, understand that you probably will have to change.
Exactly.
You'll probably read something that will change your mind or, like you said, have a stronger point. This is kind of an odd question, but do you guys, when you actually find articles, whether it's through the databases or online, do you print them out or do you read them online? What do you prefer when you're writing a paper about an article?
I like to print. So I'll save it so that I have an electronic copy already so that I don't have to sift back through the databases. I can just have it on my desktop. But I do prefer to print it out. And I know that we go through printing credit like crazy because you print out this 15-page article. But I'm the type of person where as soon as I find a quote that I really liked or I really like the wording or it really helped me understand the concept, I like to highlight it. I like to write in my own notes. Yeah. And you can't really do that to the same degree, with the electronic PDF file. Yeah. I like to have the physical copy. That's just a personal
Post-it notes
thing,
are your best friend.
Yes.
Because once you print it out, put Post-it notes on it. I always like to put I'm going to put this in the third section. I'm going to put this in the second paragraph. All of that, just so you can look at it and plug it back in.
That's a good idea. I like that. And that's what I was going to say is it seems like a kind of an obvious, funny little tip, but I personally, if I will print a stack of articles that I potentially might use, and I find it so much more valuable to go through with a printed copy and highlight or make notes or just trash, or recycle when you print a lot of articles. to have that physical copy in front of you and also I do think if you've printed, like, let's say 4 articles, it makes it less intimidating. You can kind of sit down and say, okay, these are the 4 things I need to read to figure out, what information I'm going to get from them. So just kind of an odd little tip, but I do think use those printing credits, print out articles if possible. I think that helps with reading through and sifting information. Just personally, I think you guys do the same thing too.
Yeah.
And Emma, you mentioned Wikipedia, and I think that's just a kind of an important point to make, and I think it might speak to other types of websites that are online now. But Wikipedia, I mean, do you guys use Wikipedia from time to time?
So it depends. Sometimes I like to maybe start with Wikipedia because the information and the content is presented in a way that you don't need 3 PhDs to be able to understand what they're talking about. It's presented in a very readable and plain language type of way where I can at least, say, hey, I do know what this is talking about and I understand it. And then I personally never use that as like ever a source that I put on any sort of citation page. The best thing that I've ever heard from there is to use Wikipedia as a way to form that foundation and to make sure that you understand what you're talking about, because it's easy to read. But then if you scroll down all the way to the bottom, they have like the reference page, which is all of the more credible sources that they've pulled their information from. And I found that that's a really good way to find credible sources that will direct you to the same topic, maybe just presented in a little bit more of a formal and credible type of way.
And you can even use Wikipedia as like a trial run kind of thing. So if you are looking at a topic, scroll down and then look and see if those sources are actually what you need to solidify your paper.
Yeah. Man, Abby, you're on fire. All these great tips.
I know. I'm taking notes myself. I think you guys kind of hit on it. If there's, if you're looking at some sort of term or historical event or book you've never read and you want to figure out quickly what that is about, Wikipedia is going to work for you. But, Abby and Emma, you made some great points about how to use it as a way to kind of start your trail, I would say. It's kind of the starting point. Wouldn't be an ending point, and definitely not something that most, I'm going to guess most professors would accept as a source, but it's definitely a starting point. And as you guys were both mentioning the databases and how to navigate those, one thing I think we've talked about in here just as tutors, and I know a lot of students encounter it, is citation generators. And how to, because if you're getting information, you're obviously going to have to cite it in your paper. Now, whether or not you use APA or MLA or Chicago style, that is something we'll talk about maybe in a later podcast or another workshop. But what do you guys do with citation generators?
I think it's a really good starting point. I kind of have a bit of a personal philosophy about citation generators, is that a lot of times that the citation generators are not quite as updated as Purdue OWL or any of your manuals that you would have to get for MLA, APA, any of those citation guides. So in my personal philosophy, if I am using the citation generator to get this kind of skeleton of a citation that I then have to refer to other sources to double check it and make sure it's right, why don't I just cut out the middleman and start with that? Start with the source that I'm going to check it by. So I definitely, I used it in high school. I probably used it when I was a freshman here. Before I kind of realized that there were better and more reliable and easier sources to go through. But I have a manual for APA because I didn't learn APA until I came to college. So I use that, and once I have a really good source that's up to date and easy to read, I personally don't feel any need to go to a citation generator. They're typically more work than just finding a template and then you match it up with the source you're working with.
I mean, I hate to admit this, but sophomore year, before I was working in the writing center,
important,
bold. It's okay.
In my business writing class, I had used EasyBib for, I think it was APA, And the professor was like, oh, well, that's not right. And I was like, are you serious? I used EasyBib. And then, that's right. And so that's the last time I ever used one. So I just use the stuff that we have in the Writing Center. I use the Purdue OWL.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's the best thing ever.
But Abby, I think that's completely relatable. I mean, I think a lot of people have done that to say, oh, wait a minute, I did this thing on this EasyBib or citation generator. And those websites do come across as accurate. They're so accurate, but they're not 100%. And that's the problem with them. And I think Emma makes a good point. My opinion is, too, they're just not as efficient as doing it on your own in the first way. It's cutting out the middleman. It's an extra step. And just so students know, they can be pretty close to accurate, but not always 100% accurate. And I think that's where students get confused in using them. So I think this might be a good place to wrap up. And that's a good point to plug the Writing Center, because I would recommend for students, if you are working on citations, if you are trying to figure out if the citation generator citation is correct, you can always bring it by the Writing Center to double check that. We're happy to help you with that. I would also say that if you are putting information into an essay and you're trying to connect with it and make sure you're writing about the topic and making sure that your textbook or your database article or the IRS website is showing what you need it to show in your main point or thesis, then that's also something I would recommend to bring by. Ask us these questions because we're here, that's what we do, and it's easy to get a tutor's opinion and advice on that to help you as you work through all of this so that you don't have to do it and be overwhelmed by yourself. So we will see you next time.